Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is a return guest. He's been on the podcast before, and his last podcast he did with us has had so many downloads. It's been extraordinary. He's John Rossman, who heads up his own consulting group. But prior to setting up his own consulting business, he was a very senior executive in Amazon, and in actual fact was the founder and developer of the Amazon marketplace, which now constitutes over 50% of Amazon business. And this is his third book that he's written about Amazon. This one is entitled Think Like Amazon. And in this interview, John really does share from his book, what it is to, in the digital world that we are all challenged with and that we're all facing is how do you think like Amazon? And also answer the question that, he gets asked many, many times as, in this particular situation, what would that's Jeff Bezos, what would Jeff do in this particular situation? So he really does go through, the tips and strategies that evolved in Amazon that have really helped them to become the organization they are. And a couple of things that I really found quite fascinating was their whole mindset of what they call being a day one company, where you don't lose that mindset of the day one, where it's all about innovation. It's about looking about how you can do things smart. It's about how you can do things effectively. It's how you can do things cost effectively, and never to lose that mindset and that way of thinking about the organization, but also how they really developed the obsession with the customer, and how that has driven the organization to develop new ways of doing things, new ways of communicating with the customer, new ways of really improving the customer experience. And also one of the other areas that I found really, really valuable was how they use metrics to create a culture of accountability and innovation. And we don't often put kind of metrics with innovation, but they really do use metrics extremely powerfully to really help them to drive forward the innovation. This is a great interview from, I have to say, a great book that John has written. So you will get an awful lot from this. And if you really are looking to compete in a way that organizations like Amazon do, to actually get their mindset, because we tend to be dismissive of large organizations. Say, oh, well, they're so big and there's so many resources. But when you listen to John, this actually is all founded in a very specific mindset. And this mindset is something that we all can have and utilize in our business, irrespective of the stage of evolution or the size of it. So if you want more resources like this, please go to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com. But in the meantime, sit back, have a pen and paper or digital pen and paper, whatever it might be, to hand so that you can take copious notes, because there's a lot of wisdom in this. So please sit back and listen to John and I talk about how you can think like Amazon. Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is a return guest, and I am delighted to have him along here. He's John Rossman, who's been with us before. John is the managing partner of Rossman Partners. In a previous life, he launched and scaled the Amazon marketplace business, which now accounts for over 50% of Amazon's total business. He's written a number of books, which I have interviewed him about. One, The Amazon Way, was the 14 leadership principles. Second, Amazon Way was about the Internet of Things. And his new book was Think Like Amazon. So, John, you're very welcome here today.
John, thanks for having me. Great to be back.
Listen, it is fantastic. And I just say it at the outset, I just love the book. It's one of those books that you're going to dip back into and get, kind of loads of tips. So I'm just going to kind of go through a couple just to give people a sense of it, because I really encourage everybody listening to go and get a copy, because it's going to be one of those books that you'll have on your desk or beside you and you'll dip into time and time again. I was interested actually in the way you structured it, because you've got 4 sections, and you start off, section 1 is about culture. then strategy, then business and technology, and then approach and execution. That was obviously very intentional that you started with culture.
First, the book is called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half ideas to become a digital leader. And I just found like, okay, I need some sort of, you know, substructure with 50 and a half ideas within it. But it was also kind of one of the messiest parts of the book, I would say, because so many of these ideas, they don't neatly fall into just one piece. It's just a culture idea, or it's just a strategy idea, or it's just an approach and execution. I could argue on any of these, probably putting it into different categories. So I did my best to kind of align them appropriately. But yeah, I started with culture because I think it's the strongest essence of like it, this all stems from what's our culture, and then culture helps define what strategy is, and then strategy helps execute like how we build things and how we execute. And so that was kind of my thought pattern in going in that sequence. But again, like a lot of these ideas have aspects across multiple of these categories that I put in
Sure, of
place.
course they do. Well, one of the early ones you talk about is about resetting your clocks. And, you're talking about, that it's not going to be a short journey. It's not good. But I mean, you're talking about a 7-year time horizon, which to many organizations would seem very long. I mean, a lot of organizations that I would engage with, they're looking at maybe 3-year horizons, but
Right.
you're saying, no, you've got to look out and go a bit further.
Yeah, and so it is, in fact, idea one. It's called Reset Your Clocks. Your journey will not be a short or straight line. And I think Amazon's famous for a lot of things, but I think its real superpower, kind of its understated superpower, is patience and willing to stick with things when it's a long journey, when they're being misunderstood and criticized for it. And that aspect of patience, if you want to be an innovator, that aspect of appropriate patience is a real understated component of the culture that helps make innovation happen. Amazon routinely will approve a business case over a 5 to 8 year time horizon versus, as you were mentioning, most companies are an 18-month or 3 year when payback needs to be, the ROI needs to be calculated for. And just because they're willing to do projects on a longer horizon lets them invest in a completely different way. And then I also kind of just break down in this that it is a journey. Becoming digital needs to really, you need to work it like, well, what does that mean for us? Like, what does it mean for us to be digital? I kind of break it down into two key components. It's about speed and agility. And speed is really operational excellence, like being very efficient at critical things. And agility is really the ability to sense and make change happen. And you need both of those attributes to really be a world-class digital organization. And really the book helps across those two categories of being both operationally excellent as well as agile, and recognizing the moments when you have an opportunity to innovate.
Yeah, I found that when you talked about digital, I found that really interesting when you were talking about those two elements of speed and agility, because very often when you're talking to organizations, and the whole digitalization is such a big area. They talk about infrastructure and
Right.
systems and all of that, but you go kind of completely. And I loved the quote, and I actually wrote this down. It is about speed and agility wrapped in new business models, innovation, and the collection and use of an immense amount of data. So you really
Yeah.
do focus on using the data.
Yeah, I was thinking about this weekend. It really is like, I think it's using the data for getting everyday insights, striving for operational excellence, and trying to understand markets and customers. But typically, when you are making a big bet, those things are done with intuition, and so it's both intuition and data. And I just think the data comes into play much more on the refinement and the execution piece. But typically, when you're truly making a bet or doing something different, there's a huge amount of intuition that goes into play also.
Yeah, because I mean, the innovation, I suppose it goes back to the old Henry Ford thing. If we asked his customers what they want, they would have said faster horses, and
That, that,
which isn't terribly helpful. So you do need that innovative bit if you just rely on data.
and it also goes to the essence of this chapter, which is about patience and the journey not being a straight or predictable line, which is, you know, you oftentimes have to sacrifice short-term profits and short-term stability in order to truly innovate. You sometimes have to cannibalize your own business, and you have to be willing to change traditions. Maybe it's to compete with somebody that you've been a partner with or something like that, right? Some uncomfortable things, but those are the long-term points of view you have to take versus short-term points of view.
The second one that you talk about, and I love this, where you're talking about mercenary or missionary or mission driven, and you might explain that. But I think it is something that, when you're talking about, the challenge is bringing people along with you, and you talk about, converting the mildly interested majority of employees and make them fanatics. How do you do that?
Well, this is where I try to build from where Amazon and Bezos leave off. And, Amazon and Jeff talks about like missionaries build better products, right? Because they care deeply about it. But the vast majority of people, like they don't come into a business with that type of zeal. And so you really have to recognize, like, first, you can do it with just a few really passionate people because their passion is a force multiplier across the team. And secondly, you can build that type of insight within an organization. And it's really a component of both, first, understanding the person and like what is it that's motivating to this person, and then figuring out how do you blend that in to the role and the organization in which you're bringing them into. And the other thing that really helps is constant reminder of what the mission is. And if you start every communication, every meeting, every discussion with like what your mission is, that is the type of habit that over time helps build kind of the culture and what you want, which is people really being interested in the mission of the business.
So just taking that a very specific point, you're saying you start every meeting with kind of restating what your mission is. I mean, do you mean that literally?
Absolutely. And two examples of that. I don't know if you've ever worked with any oil and gas companies, but
Yes, I'm
safety
currently working with
is
one. Yes. Yeah.
okay. Safety is the most important thing in those organizations. So what do? They start every meeting with a safety moment, right? So they remind themselves of either what the emergency process is if you have to leave the room, or they talk about some safety related thing that's going on in the business. And it's just always to put it on the top of the mind, even if this meeting has nothing to do with an operating risk or a safety thing. We keep it on the top of mind of everybody. And the second example is something that you see going on at Amazon, which is every discussion, every email, every topic starts with why is this important to the customer? And then you end up with how did our decision impact the customer? And if you do that as a habit, you'll find that first you'll question, like, if this topic doesn't impact the business, if it doesn't impact our customer, why are we spending precious resources on it? And secondly, it just helps everybody remember, like, we're here to help serve the customer, right? And so those are two of the types of habits that you see companies taking on. Really, it's really about the mission, or the most important thing in the business, and making it a reminder in everything they do.
Because I remember, reading your book, the 14 leadership principles, and number one is customer obsession.
That's right.
And it's so, it's so clearly at the very top of that. And many organizations would like to say that they're customer focused, but they don't actually behave that way. And I'm just wondering, is kind of having that at the top of conversation about meetings and being obsessed about the customer, is that how you kind of keep that at the forefront?
Well, there's lots of different ways that you need to keep it at the forefront, right? And so that's one way of keeping it at the forefront. And what you're really referencing is idea 4 in the book, which is called Obsessed is Different: Create Customer Obsession in Your Business. And there is a big difference between an organization that is customer focused versus one that is obsessed. And that is the first leadership principle at Amazon. It's one of 14. It's not the only leadership principle. And that's something that oftentimes people forget. You have to balance these out and you have to use the right principles and the right tools at the right time, right? It takes context. But customer obsession is the first leadership principle. And they chose the word obsession very specifically because obsession is a very strong word. It's pungent, right? You know when you're around obsessed. And they use that to be an excuse to the organization to be willing to solve really hard problems and to go on kind of an innovation journey to help solve problems for the customer. And that they always want people to be curious about who the customer is and what the struggles of the customer beyond just what product and what service we happen to be dealing with them today in. And so starting every discussion or meeting with deeply understanding who the customer is and why this is important to them is just one way. Another great way is having a voice of the customer program, which is a process. It's an approach of bringing forward a customer related topic or issue that for some reason isn't being addressed in the organization. Another great way, and I think one that I usually work with leaders on, is having true customer experience metrics. Most companies have good operational metrics. Most companies have good financial metrics, but most truly don't have really good customer experience metrics. And trying to have metrics beyond just your product and your service. Most really managed by customer surveys and what the competition or the press is saying. And at Amazon, we were always trying to have complement those things, what your customers are telling you, with really good customer experience metrics.
Is that reflected in how people in Amazon are rewarded? I mean, does the whole remuneration structure, does that flow up and down towards that customer obsession?
Hang on, the only problem with having 50 and a half ideas is that I don't always know which number we're referencing. And so, okay, great. Idea 7, which is called ownership for everyone, compensation strategy to drive enterprise optimization. This is one of those topics where I get into well, this is Amazon's approach. I'm not necessarily advocating that Amazon's approach is the right one for every organization. But at the end of the day, using compensation as a tool to help drive long-term enterprise value creation and long-term results is a really important tool. But what happens is compensation, along with lots of other things, are very short-term focused, and they tend to focus not on enterprise optimization, but individual or team optimization. So at Amazon, compensation is purely salary, which tends to be below market salary, and stock, which is enterprise value compensation. There doesn't tend to be team or individual bonuses or incentive structure. And what that does is it sends a message to the organization that we are about enterprise optimization, not organization optimization, not product optimization, not order optimization, not individual optimization. We are about aligning towards long-term enterprise value creation. And that's just one of those, it's just one way of sending the message to the organization about what are we going to optimize around. And I think that compensation oftentimes works against long-term enterprise optimization and focuses more on short-term results.
Well, I mean, I agree, because I find that in most organizations that I would work in, that you find that what the organization is saying it's trying to achieve, and then you look at what it's rewarding, you kind of think that's not quite in alignment. You wonder why you've got what you've got.
Exactly. I mean, especially in some sales and product organization, you see them doing really silly business just to hit quarterly numbers and things like that. And it's like, what are you valuing? Are you valuing this quarter, or are you valuing long-term enterprise creation? And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying, be clear about what your true strategy is and align all things, including compensation, relative to that strategy.
Absolutely. Can I bring you back to the third one there? Because I loved what you were talking about moving forward to get back to day one and about day one or day two companies. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think that's a great, great concept and a way of thinking.
Yeah, so Bezos has this concept of being a day one company, and a day one company is really about in Amazon's mind, in Jeff's mind, a day one company is one that's optimistic about the future, is committed to creating the future versus reacting to the future. And so then in one of his recent shareholder letters, he breaks down like, well, what's it mean to be a day two company? And he outlines many things. And I think what I really start with here is my best clients that I've worked with have been clients that are in crisis because they're willing to ask different questions, and they're willing to not let the past hold them back from creating the future. And my hardest clients are successful companies that say they want to be one thing. They want to be innovative. They want to create, a long-term lasting brand, but they're unwilling to do the hard things in order to get there. And so the concept of this short chapter, they're all fairly short chapters, is just think about the questions that you're asking and how those questions help bring you to an intellectual honesty about where we at. And oftentimes in a stagnant business, those teams and those businesses are not asking themselves, they're not looking at themselves in the mirror really honestly and admitting we are stagnant, we are at risk, we are now competing on price, our margins are being eroded. You need to do something different at those points when you still have time. And so this chapter is all about, if you're in a stagnant situation, you need to change the culture of status quo now in order to build a better future.
Yeah, because I think that, very often you go into companies and they're doing well. And as you say, there isn't the burning platform, but what actually doing well in terms of revenue or sales, it can be masking a huge amount of either inefficiencies or things that are broken that need to be fixed. And if you don't, if you're not asking those questions right now, you won't fix them and they will trip you up down the line. There's no doubt about it.
That's right. I mean, so a couple of ways you can see that is, first, if there is heavy margin erosion, that means you're not differentiating yourself to keep your price point. Secondly, if the amount of revenue that's generated from new capabilities, new products, new services is a very low percentage, that means you're not truly expanding in a horizontal or creating new paths into your customer. And so those are the couple of indicators that you're becoming kind of a status quo organization.
Yeah, I was going to say in 5 and 6, and to me they're kind of linked into each other because number 5 is about the risk of social cohesion, that opposes to achieving the hard results, and I think that is so true. But I also think it links into 6, which is about owning your dependencies, and and obviously Amazon are very, very strong about owning your dependencies and not being in a situation where you're pointing the finger and saying, oh well, Jimmy didn't actually deliver to me.
Yeah, I think the quick discussion on these two chapters is at least here in the States, getting along in many organizations, like getting along together, has become the most important thing in the business. Not having honest conversations, not holding each other accountable for delivering hard results. And all Amazon tries to do internally is balance that. Yes, it's important that we get along, that we're good colleagues, we're respectful, but it can't come at the price of being right, of achieving hard results. If you truly want to shape the future, those are hard endeavors, those are hard journeys. It doesn't happen by always striving to get along together, right? It happens because you're willing to lean into topics and chew through them and to hold each other accountable. So these two chapters really set the basis for how do we value social cohesion versus getting the right results, and how do we hold each other accountable. And the best way to help hold each other accountable is to have lots of metrics and SLAs, service level agreements, where we commit to the type of especially operational results, that we're going to deliver to each other. And this is both internally and externally. And then always basing our conversations based on, are we hitting those commitments? Yes or no? And if we're not, why not? And what we're doing about them.
Yeah, I just think that there's so many lessons in the book. And as I said, I just think it's one of those books that you really will just have beside you when you dip into, and I can certainly see how I would use it with my clients to challenge their thinking and to share the book with them, because I think there's just an unbelievable amount of gold in the book. And John, I really want to
Well,
thank
John,
you.
one thing I might just mention is you really are referencing kind of the concept between Idea 48, which is called You Are What You Eat, Create Change versus via the executive team reading list. And one of the things we did at Amazon was we had an executive team reading list, and we would take the time to talk about the book that we would be reading as a group and what did it mean for our business, right? And so we read books like, The Goal by Eli Goldratt. But, one of the things I hope to hear about is that leadership teams have taken Think Like Amazon and they work it as a group, and they evaluate, well, which of these ideas could be meaningful for our team? Which of these ideas are we willing to give an honest and patient try to help create change? But I do think the concept of an executive team reading list is a great way over time to help get new ideas into the organization, to have the conversation among the leadership group, and then to decide how do we apply that in our business going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, and the book is written in such a way that, the chapters, as you say, are not long chapters, but they're kind of really bite-sized chunks, and they're full of content, but they really can lead to very challenging questions, which I think that is really what organizations need to have to actually get them back to being a day one organization. So, John, thank you for coming along. Where can everybody get it? I presume it's on Amazon, every other place, but where can they reach out and contact you?
Yeah, so the book is available in hardback, in Kindle, and in audio version at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, at most major book retailers. I can be reached at rossmanpartners.com, and LinkedIn. John Rossman at LinkedIn is also a great place to contact me.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming along again. It's always a pleasure, and it's always so full of great content. Thank you for being a great guest once again.
Real pleasure. Thanks, John.